Good afternoon or morning to everyone, depending on where you are in Australia or the world. I'm Paddy from Streamtime, and I'm really excited today to be introducing our first Barely Managing webinar. For anyone who isn't aware, Barely Managing is a community for managers working in design run by Libby D'Souza, Andrea Neems, and Audrey Mailhot, who are all based in Melbourne. Libby's a senior producer at Portable, a research and design and technology agency. Andrea is a studio manager at letterpress and design studio The Hungry Workshop, and Audrey is a design manager at design studio Swearwords. They run events and workshops and share resources through the Slack community that they run to support managers through the challenges they face at work. They're doing fantastic work for the industry, and we're really proud to be supporting them by bringing Barely Managing to the wider Streamtime community today. And today they're going to be talking through how to communicate with intent based on a recent Barely Managing event in Melbourne with Charlie Simson of Plucky Frank. They'll discuss their experiences giving effective feedback and understanding different communication styles. They'll also be touching on dealing with conflict with colleagues or a client, and ultimately how to think more broadly about what communicating with intent means. So thanks so much for being here today, guys. Really excited to get going underway, and I suppose I'll pass over to you.
Thanks so much, Paddy. Just to follow up on Paddy was just saying, we kind of started about, I guess, a year and a half ago now. There's so many, in Melbourne in particular, there's such a great design community. And I was noticing that there were so many amazing groups and events for designers, but not so much for the people that kind of facilitate those processes. So I've worked with Libby and Audrey before through the Hungry Workshop and otherwise. So I thought I'd get them together and we'd start Barely Managing, which has been really awesome. We've got a Slack group where people are always asking questions for advice. So many times if you're an account manager in an agency, you're the only one that's there. So there's not really anybody to ask questions to. So it's been really good to have that community, and we're looking forward to, we're partnering with Streamtime this year. So we're going to be doing some more of these webinars, which is really awesome. So if you guys have any ideas for anything that you'd like to learn more about, or you've always been curious about, let us know. We'll let you know how to join the Slack group and all that after this. So looking forward to it.
Awesome. All right, I'll let you guys go ahead and get things underway, and I'll step back and let you run the show.
Awesome. Thanks, Paddy.
Awesome. So just a bit of background, Paddy alluded to before, we ran an event last year in collaboration with Charlie Simson of Plucky Frank. The session was called Communicating with Intent, and our session today is going to recap on a number of things that we learnt through Charlie, some stories, and then expanding on, I guess, how we've, been applying those learnings and our personal experiences in each of those topic areas. Audrey's going to talk a bit about, I guess, what we're kind of looking for in the webinar format.
Yeah, so if you're new to Livestorm, on your panel on the side, you should be able to comment any questions, and we'll review throughout the session. So feel free to ask us questions. We might have some polls. And yeah, please interact with us if there's anything you want us to dig deeper into. And thanks again for being present. So yeah, in this webinar, what we're going to do is to figure out what communicating with intent means, and we're going to look at the different facets of that concept. So by the end of that session, you'll hopefully have gained a new perspective, and you can use the tips and the theories we'll have talked about to communicate better with your team and your clients and pretty much everyone. So I'll pass it on to Libby to kick it off.
Cool beans. So I guess, what is communicating with intent? And I guess working as someone who spends all day, every day communicating, trying to set people's expectations, trying to close the loop on those expectations and those communications, you can definitely see, I guess, where sometimes there are people who are really just appear really good at it, and they appear really good at what is called, I guess, the soft skills of things. And sometimes this stuff might just come across as someone's personality or just their style of communication. But I guess what we learned with Charlie is that communicating well is actually something that you can practice, that there are really actionable tools that you can think about when it comes to this particular topic. So communicating is fundamentally the basis of what we're doing all day, every day. And Andrea is going to chat a bit about, I guess, like why we called this session Communicating with Intent.
Yeah, thanks, Livy. So one of the big things for me, like Livy was saying, we spend all day kind of talking to clients, talking to your team members. For me, a big thing is focus. I feel like I'm so often focused on, because I'm the studio manager, I'm focused on, responding to clients right away or keeping work moving through the studio. And sometimes that kind of rush means that I'm not always as intentional in my communication as I want to be. And that can kind of either lead to a breakdown in a job or some friction with a colleague. So I kind of need to let myself realize that it's okay to slow down and take 5 minutes to like think about what I want to say and why I want to say it and what the outcome of that is.
Yeah, it's a bit similar to me, like communicating with intent. It's really about making what we say count. It's about saying what really matters with conviction and clarity so that people in the end can understand us better. And it sort of feeds into what you're saying, Andrea, is that in turn, this just makes our lives easier because we do have a lot to deal with in the day-to-day, and yet it avoids miscommunication and helps create better relationships.
So I guess like at the core of wanting to investigate more about this topic, clarity is really at the first point at which we need to understand how we are being clear or how we are creating shared understanding. And Andrea, you have like a few like good examples, I guess, in particular about the work that you do with Hungry Workshop, about where that part of clarity like really comes into play.
For sure. So because we do design and production, we have to be very clear at the beginning, with what we're doing and outlining that and managing expectations of the clients. So outlining and scope and all that in the quoting process is critical. And that's a really important part of the process where everyone needs to be open and honest about what the client is expecting, what you're going to be able to deliver. And it just kind of makes, you need to make sure that everyone's working towards the same outcome, which is a mutually beneficial end to the project. And when that doesn't happen, that's a bit problematic. We've had we were working on a project a few years ago now where when you're in the day-to-day of what you do seems so obvious to you. But when you're working with someone who isn't used to the design process, then something that seems obvious to you is probably not obvious to them. And when we were quoting, we thought we were being clear about what was included in the production stage and what wasn't. But to the clients, from the client's point of view, we weren't. And it just led to a little bit of friction in the project. It worked out fine in the end. We managed to get it done, but it did make us realize that we needed to be really clear in our language and what we're saying and how we're saying it. Even if it seems really obvious or pedantic to us, it's just so important at that that first stage to be really clear and, obvious about what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, it's a fine balance, isn't it? Because especially it's and we'll talk about language further into the session, but it's easy to fall into jargon for the sake of clarity. But then it ends up being more confusing. So it's this fine balance between making it as friendly as possible, especially when it comes to like terms and conditions and things like that. You don't want to scare people off, but at the same time, you do have to say the important bits. Or how you clear, without using the big words.
Totally. And I guess something that we've been chatting a lot about between the three of us is, how can we be clearer in our day-to-day? How can we create that shared understanding? And Audrey, you had a really interesting kind of story about kind of briefs and how that can kind of work in ways in which we can actually be clearer.
Yeah, so it's really easy to say, let's be clear, but we'll all find that it's hard to actually do it in practice. And I am known to not always follow my own advice. But what I found is that the clarity, it doesn't all have to fall onto us. And I think, as managers, we do have responsibilities, but we're also there to, be helped. So I think that, we can get our clients and colleagues to help us build that clarity together. So for instance, in my work, it can be difficult to know whether a designer has really understood a brief. And it could be like that for even teachers, have the students really understood what's being asked of them? So rather than asking a yes or no question, it's, so for instance, it could be like, okay, brief. If you got it, we're good to go. Yeah, let's do it. It doesn't really allow for the team, the designers, to feel an opening to ask questions. So it's good to give someone the opportunity to verbalize their understanding in their own words, or I suppose just being a bit more open to making sure that people haven't necessarily understood what you were saying. So because naturally people are afraid of looking like they haven't understood. They're afraid of looking, stupid. So it's about creating an environment where, we can work on that clarity together.
Totally. And so rather than, I guess, like what you're saying, Audrey, is like, rather than asking a binary question, yes or no, are you good to go? Like perhaps phrasing like, okay, so what are you expecting are the next steps you're going to take to deliver X? Like getting someone to...
Have you got already ideas? Yeah, exactly.
Totally. Yeah, you're inviting that person, I guess, to say in their own words what they've understood in a way that hopefully feels fairly natural and isn't just like, tell me in your own words what you think this brief is about.
I know,
like,
exactly.
Seems
and
really hard.
I find as well that, okay, this is personal to me, but as a manager, you want things to go well, right? So you've got processes, and it's like, how much do you follow that process? And sometimes you can be blinded by process when another alternative to achieving an outcome or a task could be done. So by like opening this question, you have opportunities to improve on that project or that method that you have internally.
Totally. Like we have actually, for the work that I do is a bit different. I have multiple points of potential failure when it comes to understanding, because I work on a very large government funded website and I need to translate things from our client and our users through to the design team, at which point the design team have to communicate what they're designing to the client. We then have to communicate what the design team need to hand over to the development team so that the development team know exactly what to build. We also have to get the client to approve exactly what the developer is going to build. And we have all of these really tiny little points throughout the process where even, when it comes to designing for digital, like there are sometimes very long lists of functionality or how the website is going to work. So we have to spec when user presses this button goes to this link. Now, sometimes even for one feature that we might be building, the list of functionality can be hugely extensive and is often written in language that denotes to what the user might be doing. But I actually have had an experience where we sent through the written functionality and there was a difference of one word that made a difference to what the developer was building, to what the client understood was going to happen. And so when the client said, oh, you haven't quite built what we thought, we went back to what our functionality brief was. We went through it again and we said, oh, no, this is the particular piece of our specification that details what the website should be doing here. And the client said, oh, no, I thought it should be doing this. And myself and the developer went, oh, no, if that's what you thought, the wording for that actually means changing this word to this word. And so something that we've really started to implement a lot of is just general walkthroughs for any type of, I guess, anything that hinges on a decision-making, which can affect like needing to go back and redo something later, especially in development. To go back and fix something later costs a lot of money and a lot of time to redo things. So we at every point have a walkthrough, and it's just a really general kind of thing where we might just be on the phone with the client, but we actually go through the specification and we just talk through, and it seems mundane and it seems really boring and it seems like, oh, isn't that overkill? Like my client can read. But actually what we found is going through each piece of functionality and maybe phrasing it in language that's like, okay, so when the user does, what this means is actually when the user lands on this page, it's going to redirect them and an animation is going to set off at this point in time.
And it probably makes them feel, it's a collaborative effort. So
totally, exactly,
building that relationship as well. I know, Andrea, you, similar to me, estimating is a big part of, kicking off a project right.
For sure.
How do you find, the clarity relating to that part of the client relationship?
So important. Well, it's like I was saying, when it goes wrong, it's just uncomfortable for everyone, especially when you're on the front line of having to deal with clients and you go back and I should have added that extra sentence and it would have just five more minutes. So I've been really trying lately to kind of, I'll do a quote or an estimate or whatever it is I'm doing, and then I'll put it aside for a couple of hours and then go back to it and kind of try to look at it with see if it makes sense and I'm saying what I actually want to say.
Totally. Which kind of, I guess, to kind of close out this piece about clarity, you kind of can't be clear if you haven't really you haven't got a grounding, I guess, in empathy, really. So you can't really communicate well to your client if you don't necessarily understand what challenges they might be facing or how they might receive information best as well. So I guess, like, if we're communicating with intent, like, what do we need to know about empathy here, Andrea?
Well, so one of the big things that I really took away from our talk with Charlie is the intent, kind of like what Audrey was saying about getting, the other team members to work on clarity with you. Intent isn't just about what you're trying to say. It's also trying to figure out what the other person is intending or needing or wanting from the conversation, from the work, whatever it is. And it sounds really obvious to say it out loud, but when she said it, I was like, oh, of course. So for me personally, I feel like because we do a lot of production, I'm always primed for something to be going not quite right. So sometimes when I get an email from a client that maybe I'm reading as a little bit pushy or aggressive or something like that, I've really been trying to train myself, like, take a second, take a breath and wonder what their intent behind that message is, reply. So it's really just about understanding my own baggage that I bring to any kind of conversation, and putting myself in another person's shoes, cliched as that is, and understanding what it is that they are trying to say or what it is they're trying to get out of the conversation, especially if there's any kind of friction with anything that's going on. So there isn't really a big secret to it. Practicing and making a conscious effort to think about what other people's intent is as well.
And that's helpful in life too, in general, which, this is nice.
Absolutely.
But when there's kind of commerce and business and money involved, then things can get a little bit more awkward. Yeah. So I think it's doubly important.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, like, what are some common mistakes, Audrey, or some of the biggest challenges that you reckon affect people's ability to communicate well?
Well, yeah, linked to what Andrea was saying. So one big takeaway for me from our event with Charlie was this concept of the shards of good. And this was a key part of what we learned from our session with her, and it's all linked to empathy. So here is the concept. Let's say there was a big bang of good and thousands of shards were scattered across the world. Well, let's say someone, we'll call them Libby, caught the shard of punctuality, whereas another, Andrea, caught the shard of active listening. Well, that in a meeting context, well, Libby, who holds punctuality dearly, could be really pissed off by Andrea because she always arrives late to meetings. But in reverse, Andrea, Andrea, who values active listening, could be hurt by Libby because she finds that, well, Libby doesn't give her full attention in meetings. So the thing is, these two people, Andrea and Libby, they don't mean any harm. They don't set out in the world to piss off people intentionally. So it's about remembering that there's really only a few people that are actually ill-intended or psychopaths. And it's about assuming the best in people without letting your own biases cloud our judgment. So it really gave me some things to think about when I heard about the shards of good concept.
It's a really visual kind of representation, right, of that concept. That everyone has a bit. Everyone has a bit of good, but you got different bits.
Well, positive people, right?
That's right. And I guess, like, related to empathy, something else that we spoke to Charlie about was about language and how is language important in what we're doing. And something that I really took away from our session with Charlie was that words are important, like they are always important, but building individual resilience is even more important. So the way that Charlie framed it up is that in some instances, like if you consider that words are so important that they can be weaponized, you kind of run the risk of like you're losing out yourself and that you can be worn down by those words. And what she says is that we should go deeper than those words, that we should use empathy to understand the intent behind what someone is saying. So it's important to watch your language, but that bit about being able to see behind the words, why they're using those words, is even more important, because that's actually how you bring about shared understanding. It's really, really important and a really important part of communicating with intent. So I guess if we're to reflect like individually and to what Andrea said before about like bringing your own baggage to the situation, understanding bias is a really key part, I think, of being a good manager, it also being a good leader, all of those types of things. One particular thing that I've used as a tool in the past to understand my own bias is this image of the Johari window. Like, some people might be familiar with this concept before. So basically it's got this little matrix and there's kind of two different areas. There are things that are known to others and there are things that are unknown to others. And there are things that are known by you and things that are unknown by you. So if you look at things that are known to others and known by you, that is in the top left-hand corner. So open, everybody knows that. Libby knows that Libby is a perpetual optimist and I'm always glass half full. But also...
And you are punctual as well.
I'm punctual. Well, my part of good. But I guess you could also say that what people also might find that quite annoying, that I'm also really always optimistic, and perhaps I could look at that with a bit of a dark side, thinking that maybe I'm not necessarily very good, or maybe I'm not prompt to see risks really early. And so that to me is something that probably sits now with, it might be known to others, but not known by me in a particular instance. But I do actually know that is probably one of my one of my weaknesses of being a perpetual optimist, is that there's also a dark side to that. And I guess that there's kind of this little bit in the bottom right-hand corner that talks a bit about like what's unknown to you and others. We don't know yet, but this thing in the top right-hand corner is the really key part about this conversation about what is the blind spot? What do other people know as well that's not known to others? And pipe up to Catherine, who's just posted on our chat, commenting that, like, noting that bias is completely natural. And Catherine, I totally agree. So everyone has a bias and it's okay. There are positive things to your bias, and sometimes there are things that are not so positive. However, like, uncovering what they are, as Catherine has pointed out, uncovering them and keeping them in check is the window in which we can help us explore them. So something that, like as a personal experience for an instance where I had a blind spot that was known to others but not known by me, I was in a role where a key part of my role was quality assurance. So I was responsible for ensuring that everything that left the design studio was spick and span, had to be totally ready for production, all good to go. And at the time, I was working with a team who, when I came on board, they were really struggling with their quality assurance. There were things that were going to print that had mistakes in them. Things weren't really going so great. So part of that is I worked with that team to find out a process that we could kind of have in place to basically any issues that we might have. So something that I'm a big fan of are checklists. I think that a checklist is a really great way to tick off all the things, make sure they're all done. The aviation industry uses checklists every day, and so it's a proven area that we can help to improve. And so when I was working with this team, we came up with a finished art checklist, basically. And so every time we needed to send some artwork to production, each person needed to fill out a checklist, have it signed off, and be good to go, basically. And I had this one team member who, after sort of months and months and months and months of kind of talking to this individual and going, how's your finished art going? They kept struggling with it, and they kept sending stuff ready for production that had mistakes in it, even though we had this process. And I guess that I had looked to things that I knew were my strengths, that I'm a big lover of process. I actually get a bit of a kick out of doing things the same way, the same time. It's just kind of how I'm built. But it was a complete blind spot to me with this particular individual after sort of, 8 or 9 months of talking about this kind of ongoing sort of lack in their performance, that I actually worked out that this particular individual was really motivated by doing things differently every time. They were the type of creative thinker who liked to take challenges on differently every time, do things differently. And I guess that's a polar opposite of me. And it wasn't until I realized that I kind of was like, oh my God, that was a complete blind spot of mine, that I hadn't known, or I had always been holding up my love of process as kind of the ultimate way to solve the problem, when in fact, maybe I could have done things completely differently with this particular individual to get the best out of them. So
yeah, that reminds me.
What is helpful.
Yeah, I want to come back to Shane's comment, because I think it's really good. But it reminds me of this concept I was hearing, the farmer designer, and I think it was the hunter designer, and that there are designers that just thrill on farming, like tending to the artwork, making sure that it's fine, and designers that are the hunter, like they want to go for the impossible. And you need the two together to make a team that works well. But it's how do you reconcile these two? And that makes me think of your story, Libby. It's about like you've got different personalities, so you have to acknowledge them all, and they all have merit. It is the same thing about the shards of good, right? Like there's so many things, and they all have merit. It's about reconciling them. But I think Shane's comment, he mentioned, I love the Johari window, and to say that make sure you have trusted people around you that can give feedback and point out your blind spots. It can be tough, but worth it in the long term. This is something that Charlie raised as well, that if you have someone that gives you constructive feedback, even if it's negative, it is so precious, because it is so hard, and it takes a lot of risk, I guess, for someone to actually go and say, hey, I want to talk to you about something that I think you could improve on. Not everyone has is not gracious enough to do that. So it's really something to treasure.
Absolutely. Kate, you've got a question here about what changes did I make to the QA process that was able to accommodate for that individual? And at the time, like when I actually came to this realization, I was in the process of leaving that role. But I definitely, in theory, was looking at moving them off that type of work. Like once I came to that realization that this just was that type of work that they were doing, like doing the finish start checking, was just, one, it wasn't a strength for them, and two, they got zero enjoyment out of it. So if I had my time again, I would absolutely have thought of different ways to get other people who do enjoy that type of work to do that. And maybe we could have worked out different ways that allows different people to do what they are actually good at as well. So I think that once I had that information, it was kind of monumental to me to realize how that particular blind spot had actually been affecting that other individual. And absolutely, I agree with your point, Audrey. So valuable, those pieces of negative feedback. It is really, really hard to come across them sometimes. And I definitely really appreciate anyone who has ever gone out of their way to help me be better. Is really, really important.
You might need a glass of wine after that day, but still.
It's challenging.
Personal development,
you start to question your own identity. You're like, oh my gosh, this thing that, I was employed for this particular part of my role, and, it's totally a strength of mine. And, you really start to, I guess that's part of maturing in your role as you gain experience in these things. You are sometimes going to learn things the hard way. And I definitely think that in this type of role, when you are the kind of intermediary between all these different facets of communication, it can be really hard. And I definitely think that it's hard to think about that. But when you do take a step back and go, hey, hold on, who else's perspective is in this as well? It's really important, really, really important. And in all honesty, has made me a way better manager.
Yeah, and that's the emotional resilience.
They're not trying to harm you. They're just trying to make everything easier and better for everyone. Trying to get over that shock of oh God, I thought I was. Then, sleep on it for a night and then you'll be fine.
Totally, I agree. So, and I guess one point that we wanted to talk about in this bit was a bit about how can we continue to communicate better? So being aware of your bias is really important. Another story that I read about was published in Harvard Business Review, where it was a story of a woman who was managing a male colleague, and they were their direct report, basically. And so this particular manager was wanting to deliver some hard truths and some feedback about a project that hadn't been going really well. And this is what the article was saying. And so basically the way that this person, this theoretical woman delivered this information was saying, hey, look, you're going really well on this project. However, this thing's not going so well. Can you make sure you do this for better next time? But overall, good job. Yay. That's awesome. And then sort of 6 months down the track, when nothing had kind of improved around that feedback, it turned out that the male employee had only really, when they'd been in that conversation, hearing that feedback, had only really heard the positive feedback. And so even between genders, there is also a bias around the way that we communicate. And I definitely know as a woman, I'm always kind of wanting to make sure that I'm kind of, everybody's across things, and do you feel okay about it? And definitely understanding your bias in that respect, in terms of delivering information that perhaps maybe my upbringing means that I'm not so good at delivering direct feedback. And that's what they were saying in this article is something to be aware of as well in these types of roles. And Audrey, we sort of chatted a bit about this, about how that kind of affects the work, even within our own roles, about what that means for us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really linked to clarity, isn't it? And between us, we've used the term. Well, you're the one who introduced me to the term buffering. But yeah, so, buffering is what I do when I feel guilty about something that I need to say. And then I add a lot of unnecessary noise to pad what I'm going to say, to soften the blow or make it feel like it's not a big deal. And that's basically the opposite of clear. And I've found that, I still do it. And it's a hard habit to break, because this is my way of appearing empathetic and conscious of the other person, but I've found that even if I do a bit of buffering, that at the end, it's good to say, what I'm asking you to do is this. It's plain and simple. And you can add the nice words before and after, but really making it clear what I need from you or what I'm asking you to do is, X and X. And I suppose some people might be better at being clear in perhaps writing, or some people might be better in face-to-face. So I guess maybe there's a combination of both. If you do buffer when you speak, then maybe follow up with a really hard task list or something, or vice versa. But yeah, buffering is a hard habit to break.
For sure. I feel like I'm constantly doing that kind of sandwiching where I'm like, hey, this is awesome, but this isn't so good, but you're awesome. And then it actually doesn't really help or, accomplish anything. It doesn't lead to any change or growth. So I think that follows up a conversation with like a list, and that being really clear, like you were saying, Audrey, this is what I want you to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, is so important.
I mean, a shit sandwich is a good tactic sometimes. So not to throw the sandwich all the time.
Well, I think that kind of brings us to like, basically when we're delivering hard truths, like being clear and kind. And Lynn, you've just touched on it here. Being direct but kind is exactly at the core of what we need to do when we are communicating with intent. Now, Charlie introduced us to this matrix, which is based on a book by Kim Scott called Radical Candor. And basically to explain what this matrix means, it's sort of the 4 different, as I understand it, I've just got like full disclosure, I haven't read the book, but I've done some coaching with Charlie, and this is kind of how we spoke about it, is that in the bottom left-hand corner, there is manipulative insincerity. Top left, you've got ruinous empathy. The bottom right, you've got obnoxious aggression, and the top right, you've got radical candor. And these are the different kind of, I guess, management kind of styles really when it comes to delivering feedback. So other ways that you could kind of frame it is that manipulative insincerity is actually just being an untrustworthy jerk, basically, when you're delivering information. Not good.
We don't want these people.
No, exactly. The top left, which definitely I think, like after speaking to Charlie a bit about this is a really common one, is that you're just being a nice jerk when you're delivering information. And then the last one the third one in the bottom right is obnoxious aggression, which is just being a total jerk, actually. And so that obnoxious aggression is, according to, and the link there that for Radical Candor, the way that they explain it is that it's also called brutal honesty as well, where you challenge someone directly, but you actually don't care about them. But to compare that with ruinous empathy, or being a nice jerk, is where you kind of spare them their feelings, and you don't tell them what's actually going wrong. You're not clear, and you don't challenge them directly, but you really care about them and you don't want them to feel hurt. And often the way that this can manifest is that when you don't give people clear feedback from a kind place, it often ends up being like that individual can start to feel like they're being gaslit, because if they're underperforming or something's not going right and everyone around them saying, oh no, it's fine, it's okay, that person starts to feel like they're going nuts. And for the bottom left, for manipulative insincerity, is really about backstabbing, that you really don't care about them. You don't really, you don't really aren't invested in their growth. And so the really important one is that radical candor piece, and that is about being clear and being kind. Also, the Radical Candor site talks a bit about, like, if you are still delivering hard truths but you actually don't care about them, that's still being a jerk. So it has to come from a really authentic place. Like, you have to genuinely care about this person and be invested in what their growth is and care about their well-being. Really, really important. And So yeah, I think that concept of radical candor is something that we've been working a lot on here in my workplace. And to be honest, it's coming down to practice. It's trying to, for myself personally, it's breaking down a lot of old habits. Like we said, buffering, shit sandwiches, however you want to put it, like definitely coming out and saying that thing that I care about you. I want to give you feedback that is going to be really helpful for you. Know that this is going to be perhaps hard to hear, but I'm here to work with you on it, and I'm going to support you to like getting you through to succeed is a really important thing. And practicing that frame of mind is really integral to that radical candor piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And for anyone who's interested, the Radical Candor is actually available at the library. I know my council has it, and you can get it transferred to any council. So yeah, do get a copy if you want some bedside reading. Totally.
So I guess like maybe we might kind of jump into like, I guess we're going to run through like a little summary of the things that we've covered for our top tips for communicating with intent. If you have any questions, please post them on the channel now in the chat. We'd love to hear them. But running through basically our top tips, 1, create that common understanding. So communicate with clarity and ask people for to ensure that they've understood, ensure that they get enough airtime. I once learnt from a previous person that I was working with that in any conversation, like each person should have an equal share of the airtime. So if you're briefing someone and it's only you doing all the talking, briefing them in, you need to make sure that there's enough space for them to have equal airtime in that conversation as well. Use empathy. As Andrea said earlier, it is so basic, but it actually can be one of your strongest tools in your toolkit for really communicating well. Watch your language, but dig deeper than that. Understand your bias and be clear and kind. And hopefully you will be communicating with intent.
So yeah, on this, would like to open to some final questions if people want to contribute.
I saw, Catherine, you've commented on here that someone told you a long time ago that if you care enough about someone's development, then giving them feedback is absolutely the best thing to do, even if it will be hard to hear initially. That is so true. And I know that for myself in my own professional development, I want to hear about the things that I can work at and I can get better at. It's all good to hear about, yeah, this is going really great and you're doing really well and thumbs up. But there's not much that I can take away from that I can dig into my own professional development as well. And so I often think about that with other people that I'm managing, is that am I giving clear and specific feedback about instances where things have gone really well and they should keep doing that. And here's a really good instance of that. But also, like, this is where this isn't going really well. So I think that it's really important.
Yeah, and it's just about being brave and having courage. I think the things that stop me sometimes and maybe like veer me towards being nice jerk, which I obviously don't want to do, is that you have a conversation. But you know, if you work in a really small place, which I think a lot of us probably do, you have to have this conversation, and then you have to go back and sit next to that person for the rest of the day or for the rest of the week. And I think for me personally, I need to remind myself that that's not a good enough reason to not have a candid conversation.
Yeah. Especially, you know, we both work in a smaller studio, Andrea. So it's so important because you just really can't get away from, conflict, right? So you just have to be careful about how you do it. And I love what Carol said. A lot of this is about having clarity about roles and responsibilities. It's easier if everyone knows your role and in feedback, and they understand clearly their responsibilities. And I think, to me, that's actually something that I've been wondering is in what is the framework in which you allow for that hard, or harder feedback, right? So I welcome any input from everyone, or something really to think about. Is it group sessions where it's almost like a workshop thing where we're just, opening up and dropping our shield down and just really welcome this? Or is that too upfront and hard to deal with? Is it more? So yeah, really crafting some ways to deliver that. If you're not in, because a lot of us in creative industries, we're not 300 plus people with a big team of, HR department where this is like, okay, I dissociate myself from that. I don't have to give any feedback. It's beyond me. It's almost as if everyone has to do that. But if there isn't any context to do it, then you could end up maybe hurting someone. So
totally.
Yeah, just curious about some techniques.
Definitely. I know that I've worked in various different size studios, and I've sort of done everything from very formalized reviews through to just kind of casual one-on-one kind of check-ins and things like that. And I definitely think, to Carol's point about knowing what your role is, makes it easier for people to give the right type of feedback as well. So I think starting in that place, and to be honest, I actually really like the the kind of 6-month review format for me. I've definitely found that every 6 months being able to check in and kind of take stock of what's going really well, or things that aren't going really well, is a really positive thing. And having some kind of person that you trust to help deliver that information to you, or help collate 360 feedback, are all good things to have in place from my experience. So if you want to do a bit more reading, Radical Candor by Kim Scott expands more on that concept about how to deliver things with clear feedback with kindness. I have read Delivering Effective Feedback by Harvard Business Review, and I really liked it. It's sort of got 10 or so chapters breaking down how to deliver that, and I really enjoyed it and would highly recommend it. And again, a shout out to Charlie, who presented with us last year. She let us run a discussion in Melbourne where we picked her brain and had a lot of questions. Charlie runs a consultancy called Plucky Frank, and I've worked with Charlie, and I can definitely recommend, she does coaching. She has a whole heap of different formats. She does talks. She appears at different events like she did for us. So I'd recommend looking her up. If you would like to sign up to our EDM, I'm going to post into the chat now our current sign-up form for our EDM. But if you want to know more about our events, you can visit wearebarelymanaging.eventbrite.com. That's where we generally launch any of our physical events that take place in Melbourne. As Andrea mentioned before, we have a Slack channel. We have an EDM where we send out monthly resources of our top articles that we've really liked this month. We're running physical events. We have an event upcoming in February, which we're really excited about. Audrey or Andrea, do you want to talk a little bit about the event that we're running in Feb?
Yeah, so one of the things that came up a lot with a lot of the managers that we've spoken to in Melbourne specifically is negotiation, which really ties in with communication. It's such an important part of what we're doing. You're negotiating with your staff, you're negotiating with your client, and again, trying to make sure that there's a mutually beneficial outcome for everybody. So we are doing a negotiation workshop with Daniel Teitelbaum from Playful, which we're really excited about because it's going to be more of a skills-based workshop. So it's going to be a 2-hour workshop where we're actually doing some role-playing and what our negotiation styles are and how we can improve on that. So really looking forward to that. So if you're in Melbourne on February 20th, please come along.
And I think that kind of wraps up everything for today's session. Thanks heaps to Streamtime. We're so pumped to be partnering with you guys this year. We hope everybody who participated today learned something and that you have something that you can take away from today's session.
And if there's anything else that you want to learn more about or would like us to kind of put together or dig into, please let us know.
See you later, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.